Last week, Vice President J.D. Vance took on the ladies of The View. Now, individually, none of them are as good as Minnesota Governor Tim Walz at debating, and admittedly, that's a very low bar. But we saw how the vice president handled Tim Walz in the 2024 vice presidential debate. But what they lack in skill, the ladies of The View, they make up for in numbers. It was a 6-on-1 debate. And their collective argument against J.D. Vance and the Trump administration's immigration policies were, you say you're a Christian, but what about the children? And the vice president's reply was just perfect. He said, you talk about the children, he said. Here's what I would say. We know that during the last administration, we had tens of thousands of children who were sex trafficked by cartels, brought into our country in profoundly dangerous and predatory conditions. Unless you enforce the border, you invite that kind of conduct. You think it's inhuman based on the reporting of one person with a political bias. What I'm telling you is that it's inhumane to allow cartels to sex traffic people across the border. Now, that's a great quote from the vice president there, because the Biden administration's open border policies let millions of people into the country. Everybody knows that at this point, 5 to 10 to maybe even 15 million people. Nobody knows. It's a number so big, it's difficult to even wrap your head around. But the Biden administration didn't just let these people into our country. The truth is much uglier than that. Many of these migrants were sex trafficked for their labor, or sent here to be drug traffickers or drug dealers in the United States. And sadly, many of those migrants were minors. And this is the ugly reality that happens so that Sunny Hostin and Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg and all the ladies of The View can feel good about themselves. And it starts in Mexico or another Central American country, in which an individual or a family saves up their money and pays someone to smuggle them north towards the U.S.-Mexico border. We call these smugglers coyotes. They're often connected with the cartels or organized crime of some form, sex trafficking, labor trafficking. And the trip is dangerous. Dangerous places, nature, the elements, dangerous people, the cartels, dangerous circumstances throughout. And 15 years ago, during the Obama administration, when the left was calling Obama the deporter-in-chief, Amnesty International actually came out with a study that estimated 6 out of 10 migrant women and girls experience sexual violence as they are smuggled into the United States. And once they make it here, once they make it into the United States, if they make it to the United States, there's no promise of reprieve, no sunshine and rainbows. Many of them continue to be exposed to the same kind of abuse by criminals, traffickers, illegal employers. And if you were a minor subjected to any of this during the Biden administration, chances are the government didn't really care. If a minor enters the United States or they're seeking asylum or something like that, the government, through HHS, places them with a sponsor. This can be a relative or a friend, or someone much more nefarious. And the Biden administration was doing very little to vet these sponsors. They were doing very little to keep track of the kids, for that matter. Over 300,000 migrant children went missing from the Biden HHS rolls. By the way, HHS secretary that oversaw all of this, Xavier Becerra, is now the frontrunner to be the next governor of California. So when the Trump administration came in, those appointed to lead the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement had one major priority: find the kids. When they got there, things were even worse than what had been reported. The sponsors were even more poorly vetted than they thought. 65,000 calls of concern from the kids or others had gone unanswered from their tip line. Of those calls, there were over 7,000 alleging some kind of human trafficking. So the Trump administration has made massive progress on this issue. They've already found about half of these migrant children, some of whom are adults now. But the work continues. And this week on the Signal Sitdown, we're joined by John Fabricatore. He just finished a stint at Trump's HHS working to find these children, and he gives us an update on the Trump administration's progress rectifying what is, in my opinion, one of the biggest scandals in modern American history. But before we jump to the interview, I have an exciting announcement. We over at the Daily Signal have been working on a love letter to America for her 250th birthday. We've made a documentary coming out on July 2nd called Sacred Honor, the Declaration That Defines a Nation. Take a peek. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal,
that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men,
deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends,
it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it.
and to institute new government,
laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form
as shall to them seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
For the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence,
we mutually pledge to each other our lives,
our fortunes,
and our sacred honor.
Sacred Honor, the declaration that defines a nation. Presented by the Daily Signal, premiering on YouTube July 2nd, 2026. Before we get into this week's interview on the Signal Sitdown, ring that bell to get notifications on future Signal Sitdown content. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be joining us. And then while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review and comment who you'd like to see on a future episode of the Signal Sitdown. Remember, it's your government. It's your country. And together, we're taking it back. Without further ado, here's the interview. John Fabbricatore, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
And thank you for coming. You are one of the most experienced folks in Washington, D.C. when it comes to immigration and everything that goes along with it. First and foremost, tell us about your career path. You just finished up a stint at HHS. You were in Trump-era at ICE. How did you get into the business of securing our border?
Yeah, you know, it really goes back to 1990 when I joined the military, entered the United States Air Force, did 4 years active duty in the Air Force, worked for Federal Protective Service for 3 years after I got out, worked the first World Trade Center trial, both Oklahoma City bombing trials. And then I transitioned over to INS, the old INS, back in 1998. Worked for INS through 9/11. After 9/11, we became ICE. Went to the academy and taught at the academy for 2 years with ICE. Came back to be a supervisor for fugitive operations. Worked fugitive operations for a couple of years at the supervisor level. Went out on the street, was on a U.S. Marshals task force. Worked a lot of great cases, had a lot of fun in that portion of my career. And then I started to transition into upper management, became an assistant field office director and then a deputy field office director. Spent some time down at the border as deputy chief of staff on Joint Task Force West. Worked the Afghanistan withdrawal. Then decided to retire in 2022 as the field office director of the Denver field office, which covers all of Colorado and Wyoming. So I had two great western states. Unfortunately, Colorado's transitioned to a sanctuary state, but it wasn't always like that. We used to have some really good relationships with the local police departments and sheriff's departments there and worked really well in securing Colorado and Wyoming. After I retired in 2022, I decided to run for Congress, ran for Congress, CD6 in Colorado, lost that race to Jason Crow, who's a Democrat. After that, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I wrote a book on immigration and just kind of was sitting out for a minute. And then Tom Homan gives me a call and Tom says, "Hey, John, I've got a project that I'd like to put you on in D.C. How would you like to come back, work for HHS as a senior advisor and look for these kids that were lost under the Biden administration?" And when Tom Homan calls you, he's not really asking, So I knew, and I was honored that he had reached out to me, So I said, "Yeah, Tom, I'll do that. I'll come to DC for a year, work over there at HHS," and I got to work with some great people at ORR. The acting director, Angie Salazar, who's an HSI. SAC, and she's great, and some great people that were put over there to help on this project. Some great people in the war room looking for these kids, and for the last year, that's been our mission, dealing with the UAC effort, dealing with refugees that are coming in, and it's been a really great experience. Something that I'm really glad that I did, and we put a lot of effort into it.
We're going to get back to the Biden missing children in a minute, but there's so many interesting little bits and pieces of your career. First, you're in INS as 9/11 happens, and this massive transition occurs where INS becomes ICE, the Department of Homeland Security is created, and it's not without debate in conservative circles on whether or not DHS is the proper structure, whether or not DHS represents, when it is abused, not necessarily its core functions of maintaining border security and things like that, but it can be misused to be weaponized against the American people fairly easily. We saw that during the Biden administration. And so take us back to those years in INS as you're going through that transition. What was that transition like? How do you think the first 25 years of the Department of Homeland Security has played out?
Yeah, the first couple of years were growing pains. There were many agencies that were stuck together, agencies that were ended, such as Customs. Customs was stuck in with ICE, with immigration. We became ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, and that was huge. You took two separate agencies, stuck them together, put all their authorities in together. There were a lot of growing pains there. And still today there's some of that, through legacy INS and legacy Customs that still kind of rears its ugly head. But for those first couple of years, we were just trying to figure out what this new apparatus, this new department was really going to look like, what our innate powers were going to be and how it was going to be handled. Of course, there were some missteps in the beginning, and I think we more grew into that role. And as you said, in certain situations, it matters what your leadership really is, on how it determines how an agency is run. So when you have better leaders who are more constitutionally focused and, within the confines of the way the law is written and allow you to do your job, as written by Congress, you have a good career. When you have people that come in, such as under the Biden administration, who either shut down immigration controls or misuse authorities, as they did under COVID, you have difficulties, inside those kind of administrations. So, I'll be the first person to say, that, initially under, Obama 1, we were doing some great immigration work. We had a lot of deportations that were occurring. Some really good work was being done. We were doing some work site enforcement. The last 4 years of Obama administration, he really took his foot off the gas with immigration and totally went, totally different.
Called him the deporter in chief.
Yeah, they did. In the first 4 years, I mean, we were doing some really great operations and making some really good arrests. And then the last really 3 years of his presidency, everything turned around. We saw anti-ICE coalitions start to pop up their heads, and there was a lot of pushback. And then the first Trump administration came in, and President Trump had some really great ideas on what he wanted to do with ICE, but I think lawfare got in the way, and the left really sued on every single thing that he wanted to accomplish. And I think it was really tough for President Trump under the first administration dealing with that and not having the backing from some of the politicals around him and from Congress to really get the mission accomplished. And then we had Biden who just threw everything, into the gutter, concerning immigration control. The border was not secure under the Biden administration. No, there's not a person alive that can argue that point that it was secure with me. I mean, we see the numbers. The numbers and the statistics are what they are. He allowed hundreds of thousands, millions of people to come into this country, lost 400,000 kids through ORR. It was a mess. And then, Trump administration comes back. President Trump wins, a second term. He's more focused on what he wants to do with immigration, has a better plan, has better people backing that plan up for him. And still yet, the left still sues every time he tries to get something accomplished. We've got the most habeases that have been filed, on our cases that we have that are in custody. We've got judges who just refuse to really follow the law and are, in trying to run this country from the bench. So, we're in some difficulty right now. We need a mass deportation effort. This is the best time, if we're going to accomplish that, to really get that goal accomplished. But we need to remain focused. We need to know where this needs to go inside this country. We cannot allow unfettered illegal immigration. We cannot allow the fraud that we're seeing in these refugee circles and through illegal immigration, the amount of money that it's costing this nation. If we can get that under control, I think this nation will be more secure and in a better place.
So during Obama, I'm so glad you brought up the Obama administration, because if the old heads, I guess now, which is crazy that I'm saying this because this was when I was coming.
I'm an old head
of age politically, but that Telemundo debate in the 2016 DNC primary, where they just ripped on Obama over and over and over again for those first 4 years of him being the quote-unquote deporter in chief. He did have higher deportation numbers than George W. Bush at the time.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting there, you see the first years of the Obama administration. Seems like you're doing good things. Obama's kind of holding this line. It was disingenuous, but he's holding this line that, hey, we want you to come in the right way. We're going to jack up all sorts of visa admittance and wave my magic wand to let dreamers stay in the country, and all that type of prosecutorial discretion, all that type of any lever that he could pull to get more immigrants into the country legally, he pulled it. But he was still arresting and deporting illegal immigrants. Then he stops doing that in the last few years of his presidency, as you outlined. And then Trump comes on the scene. And Trump hits everybody over the head with a baseball bat, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans for their immigration agenda. And you're sitting there at the time in the immigration enforcement apparatus in the Obama administration. What do you make of this Trump guy in 2015, 2016, and what he's saying about immigration?
It was exactly what we needed. Look, President Trump didn't make up new laws when he came on. He enforced the law as it was written in the INA. He had very smart people around him that had looked into the Immigration Nationality Act and said, hey, this is what we're not doing. This is what we can do. Let's do it. And they attempted to just follow the law as it was written by Congress, as the Democrats have voted for in the past under President Clinton. And President Trump was like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to follow the INA. We're going to do these deportations. Everything is on the table. If you're an illegal alien inside this country, you can be arrested. And we're going to follow that law, and we're going to try to make these arrests. And all we saw was pushback. So, like you have said, under Obama, the deporter in chief, we did see a lot of arrests, although you're entirely right. Every other program that he could, get people in, he was definitely doing that. That's why we have some of the problems with some of the refugee communities that came in, is because there was a lot of unvetted access that happened under the Obama administration.
Oh, that's so true. I haven't even thought about the Obama angle, because he was brilliant in his knowledge of where to place certain installations in order to change the political circumstance for the Democratic Party. He started in Georgia, right?
Yeah.
The military is perceived as being
very red, right?
Very red. Mm-hmm. The only part of it is the college-educated. The only part of it that's blue is the college-educated, software engineers, those types of folks. And so what does he do? Well, he opens up a military installation in Georgia during his presidential administration that employs somewhere between 10 to 15,000 military employees in these types of jobs. And those are the people who, quote unquote, are coded blue in the military. And 15,000 votes in Georgia is a powerful thing.
It can change.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with, the types of areas that they looked at to drop refugees off in. I mean, this was all a blueprint by Blue, the Democrats, to really change congressional lines and, apportionment and, bringing people in that they knew were at some point in time probably going to vote Democrat, and changing the demographic of areas. So like you said, Obama was brilliant in that. And on one side, having us actually enforce immigration law, but in the background, changing the course of this nation at the same time. So then President Trump gets in, and, President Trump really ran on securing the United States, making sure that we had immigration control, and again, following the law. He didn't change anything. No new laws were written. The INA is very specific. The Immigration Nationality Act is very specific in the laws that have already been put there by Congress. And he just wanted to enforce those laws. And yet there was just lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, even under Trump 1. I think it was over 700 lawsuits, and most of them never went to completion. They were just filed as roadblocks. And we're seeing that same type of lawfare again now that he's got his second term. But he's doing things a little bit differently this time, in that the lawfare doesn't matter because, the way that we're following the law this time, we're just able to go one court level up above. We're able to put things in front of the Supreme Court. We're able to get decisions where we're still able to do removals and still able to enforce immigration law. But it wouldn't be as hard as it is now if they just weren't throwing lawfare at it every chance that they get.
I want to ask you about the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2 on the immigration issue in just a moment, because I think it's so interesting how, first off, the political precursors has changed, and then second, how the policies have changed. But first, you mentioned, is your time in, what was the exact title? You were field marshal?
Yeah, I wish I was a field marshal. Field office director, yeah.
But you said you had some really fun cases.
Oh, with the U.S. Marshals.
With the U.S. Marshals.
With
Sorry,
US
yes,
Marshals,
you're
yeah.
the U.S. Marshals.
Yep.
You said you had some really fun cases. What can you tell us about those cases and your experience there? I don't want to remove us too much from your background.
No. I mean, a lot of it.
Come back to it.
A lot of it was immigration centric. So we were on the U.S. Marshals task force. We were looking for red notice cases, foreign-born individuals that were wanted for homicides and big crimes in their own countries, and had come over to the U.S. and had warrants in other countries. We were also doing a lot of 1326 cases, re-entered aggravated felons that were in the United States again. So it was a way to kind of joint stat a lot of the work that we were doing with the U.S. Marshals and lend a hand in some of these arrests. But we would also do mostly immigration arrests, but we did do some other arrests on United States citizens that were wanted for homicides and other really violent crimes, violent rapes and things like that. I was on the Adam Walsh task force for children. There was a violent offender task force that I was on with the U.S. Marshals, and we just had some great cases where I was able to work with local law enforcement. We were able to make some really good arrests on very violent people, do a little bit of undercover work and bringing some of those people out, and just securing the community. When you join law enforcement, I mean, that's especially as a younger guy, you want to be out on the street, you want to be making those kind of big type arrests and getting out there and doing that work. And I was able to do that from 2005 to 2011, where I spent just a lot of time on the street just working those type cases before I decided to really enter management.
Yeah, I apologize if this is a little bit of an uncouth question or an inappropriate question, but it's a difficult job, and it's probably a very ugly job sometimes to do that. But is there, I can almost compare it to, because I've done this in my life, I'm talking from experience, right? It's like hunting. I don't want to, internet, shut up. There is probably a sense of relief and gratification when you bring someone like these violent offenders to justice and close the case.
Yeah, and I mean, hunting is kind of a good analogy to it. I mean, you are hunting violent human beings, and you have to be very, very careful. I mean, they a lot of, especially with the U.S. Marshals Task Force, they're going after, it's called the Violent Offender Task Force. I mean, they're going after men and women who are violent. They have violence in their background. They've used firearms before. They've assaulted people before. So you have to be very vigilant. Your head has to be on a swivel. You're doing a lot of surveillance. You're waiting to arrest these people in the middle of the night as they're coming out of bars, and as they're coming out of seedy hotels that they just bought dope at. So there's always the chance that you're going to be in a situation. And I took multiple guns off people. Got into physical altercations, making arrests. So there's always that chance on these cases that you're going to be in bad situations, and you just train for that the best that you can. You continuously train. If you're in task forces like that, I'm an avid shooter. I spent a lot of time on the range. When I was on the task force, I spent even more time on the range to make sure that my skills were very good. I'm very much into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I wrestled as a kid. I kept up those skills when I was on the task force because I knew that the citizen wants the best law enforcement officer out on the street protecting them, and I wanted to make sure that I could be that best representation of what a law enforcement officer should be.
So back to Trump 1 versus Trump 2. Thank you for going down that rabbit hole with me, because it's just, it's really interesting. I don't think people understand, especially at home, what comes with the job, what comes with the territory. But now we're looking at Trump 1 versus Trump 2. In Trump 1, Trump's immigration agenda differentiates himself and is popular enough to get him into the presidency.
Yeah.
But this word mass deportations, probably, I don't even think it was being polled at the time. It wasn't branded the way that he did. But the term mass deportations at the beginning of Trump 1 was probably very unpopular. Compared to Trump coming in, Trump 2, approval of mass deportations was polling at something like 50%. Of course, the polling has gone down. That does not surprise me whatsoever, because these operations are complicated and difficult, and the interests aligned against those operations and removing people from the country are organized and intransigent. But nevertheless, just a completely different political situation. And you see how this is manifested in very different policies, or more effective policy in Trump 2, if I might suggest. The first administration, for example, you have the attempt at a quote-unquote Muslim ban, the travel ban, and how they really struggled to move that policy at the early days of the Trump administration. In Trump 1, Trump 2, it's a completely different ballgame. It's like that piece of the pie, that piece of the puzzle was kind of a cakewalk, and they're doing so much else on the immigration front, whether it's student visas or removals or different types of operations, putting in military installations around the border, all sorts of that type of stuff. So break down the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2 and the effectiveness of its immigration policies.
Yeah, so under Trump 1, I think initially when Trump started speaking about immigration enforcement, it was just enforcing the law. He wanted to get back to ICE being able to work with local law enforcement, because right at the end of the Obama administration is really when you really saw the anti-ICE element start to pick up. You really saw the Antifa elements start to come into play. And Trump was able to look at that situation and say, hey, we're just going to enforce the law. Like there's this thing called the Immigration Nationality Act. It should be followed. We should be able to secure our border. We should be able to support our ICE agents and let them do their job. And I don't think that he realized how much the left would use that against him once he really started to enforce the law. They needed something that they could raise up and have their media moments. I think where, as Republicans and conservatives, where we start to drift off and lose a little bit is our putting our message out with the media. Like I think we need to be more forward-facing and in front of things that we do with ICE and that we do with immigration, instead of trying to answer those questions after the left has already had their media moment. It's not good for us to be on the defensive so many times. I think we should be able to explain exactly why we're doing what we're doing to the American public in the right way, and just exposing them to exactly how ICE is accomplishing the mission, what we're going out there to do, how we're arresting these worst of the worst, but also getting those who are still illegally present in the U.S., and just be very, very, very upfront about what our messaging should be. Right now, I really feel that the left is able to control the narrative, and once they kind of latch onto something, and we've seen it. Any mistake ICE makes is going to be amplified 1,000% by the left. Like, you have to be perfect in your job with ICE, because if you're an officer and you do the wrong thing on the street and it's caught on film, they're going to amplify it to the 1,000%. And that's not to say that if ICE does something wrong, it shouldn't be looked at, because obviously we don't want to make mistakes. We are dealing with human beings. We don't want to be doing the wrong thing on the street. Officers should be honest and have integrity and be out there doing the best job that they can do. But I think that left is going to pick up on every little bit of minutia that they can and amplify that to their effect. So we have to have proper messaging. In Trump 1, I think that messaging was just, hey, let's enforce the immigration law as written. Let's get some deportations. Let's keep that level above what Obama deported, and let's be successful at securing our border. And I think President Trump did a good job at that, even with the lawfare that was occurring. Under the second administration for Trump, he's coming off of the Biden administration letting in millions of people, and that visual being out there in the media and people being able to see thousands of people underneath bridges down in Texas, thousands of people running across the border, thousands of people lining up illegally across the border fence in the Lukeville area down in Arizona. Just, stories on people coming into the country and getting caught, within weeks that have criminal backgrounds. So a lot of the American public saw this, and I think because of what happened under Biden, the mass deportation message was able to be amplified, because we know that Biden let in millions of people that should not have been able to be let in. There was an end run around Congress. They didn't follow the law and what they should have done. They said the border was secure. They lied about it. They lied to Congress, sat there and said they secured the border, still were allowing in hundreds of thousands, millions of people by the end of the Biden 4 years. And then Trump comes in on day one and within days has the border shut down. And what did he do that was any different than what Biden did at the border? He just said it was shut, and he meant it, and he wasn't going to let people in, and they stopped coming because they knew he was serious about it. They knew Biden was not serious about it when Mayorkas is standing up there saying he's not going to stop people from making that journey up, that, people are going to be let in because they have a right to claim asylum, even if it's fraudulent asylum. And we know 80% of those cases are asylum fraud. President Trump was serious about enforcing the law. He said he was going to secure that border, and we saw those numbers drop down to minimums. There's dozens of people now trying to cross the border a day instead of thousands of people trying to cross the border a day. So we're in this situation now where we can do mass deportation, and we should have mass deportation. We have an opportunity right now in the United States under this administration to fix our immigration problem, fix the fraud and the amount of money that's being thrown toward illegal immigration, remove everyone here who crossed that border illegally, and set up the process that the United States deserves and the kind of immigration law that we should be enforcing and keeping this country safe and secure. And that's what we're trying to do under this administration. But the left will not rest, and they're going to fight every inch of the way.
Yeah, they're going to fight every inch of the way. And to your point on the media, the Renee Good shooting, which in my mind was completely justifiable, that was, headline news for weeks, it seemed. And Biden misplaces 300,000 children.
Yeah.
300,000 children just lost in the wind. And that was something that the corporate media tried their best to ignore, right? That was that should have been a massive scandal. There should be something like Childgate or something like that.
It is.
But it never, ever got that name.
It never did. It never did. And you have Becerra running for governor of California.
He's going to win, and he's considered the experienced.
Experienced in what?
An accomplished individual. It's insane.
He's a failure. Becerra is a failure as a leader at HHS. An absolute failure as secretary of HHS. When you look at the fraud that we're finding now that's occurring under HHS through Medicaid and Medicare and SNAP and every other benefit, through the the Somalians up in Minnesota, through other fraud that we're finding that occurred. Yes, that we're finding through HHS. This happened under Becerra's watch, and nothing was done. Under Becerra's watch, over 300,000 children, 479,000 children were mislocated. We don't know where they are. They're missing. The left can argue about that term with me all day long. If I don't know where a child is, that child is missing. Becerra treated Becerra treated these children as a assembly line. They were just a commodity, a widget to him. He wanted them out of these secure facilities that HHS had within days. He wanted them out into the streets so he wouldn't have to think about them. They were given to sponsors who were raping them. They gave them to sponsors who were drug addicts, and children died of overdoses of heroin. They gave them to sponsors that tortured them for years. They gave them the sponsors that put them into labor trafficking. We had a case yesterday that was in front of the DOJ. The DOJ did a media interview. One Guatemalan illegal alien took over 40 kids. She put them into labor trafficking. She was an illegal alien and showing different IDs every single time that she applied for another kid. And under Becerra, they let 40 kids go to her. There are over 15,000 cases in which more than 3 kids went to sponsors. So 3 or more kids went to 15,000 sponsors. We have like 60,000 cases in which the same addresses were used over and over and over. They didn't catch this. Same multiple phone numbers were used. There was so much fraud that was happening, and Becerra caught none of it. And they're going to let him run California? They want this guy to run California? He was an abject failure as secretary. And this is what the left is telling us would be the best thing to run the state of California.
And it tells you how you improve your lot in the Democratic Party now, right? Is that you take part in a patronage system, right? All those hospice centers in California, you make sure that you are in a critical position in the cash flow, in the stream that keeps the left propped up in this country. It's unbelievable to me that they lost, you said 479,000 children was the final number. Yeah. And it was all because they think that immigration is an optics problem, and they also believe that it advantages them politically to pass these children off to sponsors like that. And it's it's one thing to lose children and do a mea culpa, we're going to try to find them as quickly as possible. Of course, the Biden administration did that. Instead, you brought it up. The left tries to debate with you on what missing actually means. You mentioned this. You said they'll try to tell you that they're not missing. Listen, if I don't know where a kid is, they are missing. So what is the left's argument? These kids aren't missing, according to them?
Paperwork issue. That's their argument is, it's just paperwork. I've found 48.
Tell that to social services with your own children.
I found 48 dead kids. We found 48 kids deceased. So no one knew. Let me put this out there. And under Becerra, there were 65,000 notices of concern that came in. These are telephone calls where kids were getting raped, were getting abused, and they're calling into HHS for help that went unanswered. And when Trump administration came in and we discovered that these were out there, 65,000 calls had come in. So we started looking into these calls, and that's when we initially found 37 deceased children of calls that came in. We found children that were being raped. We responded to those calls after they had been sitting under Becerra for weeks, months, years. We responded, saved those kids. But imagine you're a little kid. You find this number that you can call into HHS. So you call in begging for help and you leave a message, please help me, I'm being abused. And days go by, weeks go by. You're waiting for someone to come to save you. Months and months go by. No one is coming to save you.
You're a little kid. You think you just called Superman,
yes.
Right?
Yes, and no one came. That happened under Becerra's watch. Under Trump, we cleared all 65,000 of those cases, responded to every single call that we could. Unfortunately, we were too late and found 37 children deceased by that time. We already found children that were getting raped multiple times over months, years that they could have been responded to, and we responded and shut those down. We have now cleared all 65,000 of those cases, and now we've set up a process where when we get a call, we respond to that call within hours. So it gets sent over to HSI. If HSI can't handle it and needs to go to the FBI, it'll go to the FBI. We are working with multiple law enforcement agencies to respond to those calls as fast as possible because a voice is on the other side of that line. A little kid is relying on us to respond to them. And under the last administration and under Becerra, they did not do it.
I mean, it's just heartbreaking to think that the government, which is supposed to serve the American people and is supposed to serve so long as they claim that these children are in its care, those children let 65,000 cases go unanswered. It's unconscionable. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, sadly. That's just the backlog of the most extreme cases on that hotline. You had hundreds of thousands of other children. Tell us about how many children the Trump administration has managed to find / track down, and how that project is going.
So we're over 140,000 right now. And they're not all saves, so that's something the left is going to say, oh, Trump's not out there saving these kids. No, I mean, some of these cases we've found through court process, through arrests that ICE has made. So a lot of these are age outs now. So what we have to think about and understand is when most people hear me speaking about kids, I think the visual in their head is, 6 to 8 year old kid that's out there.
Teenagers.
Most of them were actually teenagers. So over 80% were over 14 years old.
Right. They have to be able to be passable for the labor camps.
Yes.
And those types of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they were coming up for economic benefit, coming into the United States. The New York Times did a great story, I think, back in 2003 or 2004 on it, on how many kids they were finding that were being labor trafficked during the Biden administration. So a lot of these teenagers were coming in and being put into bad situations. And I'm going to say something right now, and I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this, but I mean it when I say it, that the Biden administration caused the largest smuggling operation to occur under their watch. So the cartels were bringing these kids up to the border, dropping them off with ORR. The cartels knew that the parents had already entered the United States because the cartels helped those parents enter the U.S. Everyone pays dues crossing that border. They're paying something to the cartel. The cartels knew the parents had got in. The cartels moved these kids up to the border, dropped them off with the Biden administration. Under the Biden administration, they were moving them out within 9 days. So they were coming into care at ORR. Within 9 days, they were sending them out the door and ringing a bell like they were at a used car lot. Bang, 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 a kid's out the door. Here we go. Yeah. Here we go. And then the United States government under the Biden administration would put them on planes, trains, and automobiles and move them further into the U.S. to be with their illegal alien parents who had illegally entered the country and were now residing in the U.S. The Biden administration was part of the cartel smuggling operation. I'm going to say it. I'm putting it out there. I mean it. This is not hyperbole. This is what happened. The Biden administration caused the movement, the trafficking of those kids from the border to their illegal alien parents in the interior of the United States. Before the Biden administration, the cartel would have taken the whole family unit in. And I used to work these cases as an agent. In Colorado, we would stop smuggling loads coming over I-70. We would work with the Colorado State Patrol. We'd hit a load in a Suburban, 15 people in a Suburban. There'd be moms and kids and dads all packed into the Suburban. That's how the cartel were getting in family units. During the Biden administration, they didn't have to do that. They could get the illegal adults in across the border. They knew the Biden administration was just kind of waving everybody in and letting them in. So they'd get one payment from the adults. The adults would get moved into the United States. Then the cartel would move the kids to the border, drop them off for ORR to pick them up. Well, the Border Patrol is picking them up, turning them over to ORR. Once that happened, the parents would then call down to ORR, offer the sponsor the kids. Our own government was then paying for the transportation, the end of the smuggling cycle to those parents. The parents would then send a payment to the cartel for their kid, and that would be the end of the smuggling.
And in the best case scenario, that kid is ending up with their parents.
That isn't the good thing you brought that up.
Yeah, no, it's
you are entirely right, because here's another thing that the Biden administration did not do. So DNA, Trump wants DNA run on familial units to prove that families are who they say they are when they save for these kids. The Biden administration let in 2.7 million family units into the U.S. They only used DNA in a little over 300 of the cases. So they only tested 300 out of 2.7. That's a 0.01% of the cases that came in. Now, here's another statistic that'll throw you off. Out of that 300, I think it was 314 DNA cases. Out of that 314 DNA cases, 15% of them they found not to be a familial match.
So at scale, that's unbelievable.
And they still didn't continue to do DNA. And they knew that 15% of the 300 were not family, and they stopped running DNA.
So 2.7 million, I mean, 15% of that is over 300,000 different family units that are mismatched. And we see the result of this, actually some of the best reporting, ironically, kind of in the late 24, early 25 era, if I'm remembering correctly, was from the New York Times.
New York Times, PBS, they were doing stories.
Series of these children who came to the United States, were trafficked into the United States, and were put into these labor rings or these sex rings.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, it's not the 9-year-old kid working a construction job. Sometimes it is.
Yeah, sometimes.
That's rare. But it's 14, 15, 16, 17. That's where they are. And you know what it reminds me of? It's the exact thing that Epstein did.
Yeah.
Epstein, his pedophile ring, it was children in that age group to maintain that quote-unquote plausible deniability of the whole situation, to take advantage of different systems or different people. And it seems to track exactly on how these cartels operate, or how these other organizations operate with taking advantage of these children.
Well, here's the other thing about teenagers too. When they come in, if they can't find a job, they are prime access for gangs and cartels.
Yeah.
So, I was doing some consulting right when I had retired. I was down in El Paso. I was interviewing some Venezuelan teenagers that had come in, some teenagers that had come in from Honduras and El Salvador. And I'm talking to them, and they couldn't find jobs at the time. The churches had kicked them out because they were messing with a lot of the young girls that the churches were protecting. So the churches had kicked them out. Those young men were starting to turn to gang violence and a criminal element because they didn't have food. They had nowhere to sleep. And when a cartel runs up to one of these guys and they say, hey, we'll give you money, just drive this car up to Denver, Colorado. The car's loaded with methamphetamine, with heroin, whatever. Just drive this car to Colorado. You're going to stop at this location, drop the car off there. We're going to give you a bunch of money. So these young men then run into now drug trafficking and doing other illicit things in the United States, because in their thought process, they're coming to the U.S. to make as much money as they can. They're going to send this money back down to their countries in remittances, like to Guatemala, for instance. Like over 15% of their GDP is actually illegal aliens sending remittances down to Guatemala. 15% of their gross domestic product. So their own people are making, illegal aliens are sending money back down to Guatemala. So a lot of these young men are coming in here to make money. They have this idea in their head that America is the place that they can make a lot of money, and they're going to do it whether it's illicitly or whether it's finding a job with a roofing crew or a landscape crew or whatever.
So the scale of the problem is just so immense. It's hard to even wrap your head around the missing children alone. Then you add on top of that the immigration numbers from the Biden administration.
The Biden administration made these kids less safe. They knew it was mostly teenagers. They knew letting these teens in, and a lot of these teens aged out. So, we had a lot that were coming in claiming to be 17 years old when they were really 19, 20 years old. And you can't tell the difference. They're coming in with no documents, claiming to be, and they come in, they say, I'm 17 and 9 months. And within a couple of months, they turn 18 and they were being released to the street. The Biden administration released thousands of 18-year-olds just straight to the street. Where do you think these kids went?
Yeah.
They became less safe. They either got involved in labor trafficking, they were put into bad labor situations, or they started committing crimes.
And so with the scale of that problem, for you, I mean, if 2028 rolls around and this 4-year term comes to an end, I mean, what is your metric for success?
The Trump administration and President Trump wants to do this. He wants the mass deportation. He wants to get his hands around the immigration process. They need to be successful in that. There needs to be mass deportation. And you and I were talking earlier before we went on the air on how do we even measure that metric? You know, a lot of people are leaving on their own. You know, the left is saying that Trump's numbers are wrong. But, you know, how do we quantify, you know, people that are actually leaving because Trump is making it hard for them, and as we should. He's debanking illegal aliens, you know, making it difficult for them to be here and get benefits. And the more benefits we take away, the more we debank them and make it harder for them to remain in the United States, we're going to have a lot of them leave voluntarily. And that's what we should do. That's less money for the United States. We're not putting them into detention and having the left show up at Delaney Hall and complain that people are in a bad situation. They're not. When I was a field office director in Denver, I had the media come into my jail. They came in with cameras. They interviewed people. They were able to look at the food, able to taste the food, whatever. This happens all the time. The left uses this whole narrative that, you know, people are being kept in bad custody, but they never go to local jails to see how local jails are treating United States citizens. They don't care. They're using this as their media message. We need to combat this. We need to push back. We are removing people. They won't be in custody for long if they remove. If they take voluntary departure, they take voluntary removal, they leave the United States. They won't even be in custody. The left is pushing back. The left is telling them to fight, keep their cases moving, because they believe that there'll be a Democrat president that comes in and they'll be able to get benefits for these illegal aliens.
And we got to put a stop to it. John Fabricatore, thank you for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. If you liked what you heard here today, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, before you go. And we love your feedback. It really does help the show. So please remember to leave us a review and comment who you'd like to see on future episodes of the Signal Sitdown. It's because of your support and your interest and your engagement that allows us to continue this incredibly fun work. And together, we'll continue to expose how Washington really works and affect real change. We'll see you next time on the Signal Sitdown.